But otherwise, if it's best practice, yes, it should be followed.
All right. Please describe your experience with land use and municipal planning and or how your experience is relevant to the role of the Planning Commission.
I have none, other than I'm an avid home remodeler. But that's my whole experience with code and planning. You know.
Describe how you would use the city's codes and other information to balance the rights of a property owner versus those of a neighbor and or groups of people if you find they are in conflict on an application.
That is something I think that requires a group decision. It's not one person, and that's something that we should all get together and discuss with all the parties and then come to hopefully a fair choice. Sometimes private interests are trumped by community interests and what's best for the community.
All right, that was our 5 questions.
Sorry,
Council,
guys.
do you have anything you'd like to add? Valerie?
Yes, I'd like to thank you for applying, and I will tell you that when I became a city councilor, I was kind of like an open book as well. I had not had that experience being there, but it is a huge learning curve. So I'm going to ask you from the perspective of how do you feel your ability to take in new information, you know, what are those skills that you have in that field, not necessarily in the planning field, but in the life skill field of taking information and working it and coming to a decision?
I think I probably excel at that. I spent 35 years working in the emergency department where medicine was not static. There was always something new and different, and as we learned new and different and better ways to do things, we had to adapt. So I can tell you that, 30 years ago, what we did now was contraindicated. So, yeah, I'm always open to learning something new and different. And I travel extensively around the world and lead medical teams into other communities, and what works in the U.S. does not work oftentimes in different areas. And so you learn, you adapt, and you find best practice that works for each community. I'm pretty adaptable. I had to be.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm trainable.
Rick?
Thank you for applying. And are you open for other positions in the future as
I am.
Opportunities come up?
I am. I'm a big believer in being active in the community. Girl Scouts, Cubs. I did it all. Now I'm retired, so I have even less time on my hands. So.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you applying, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations on your retirement. All right, our next candidate is Eric Hesacker. Eric, are you here? I think I see him coming in the back door. Hi, Eric. Step on up to the podium.
Wow, what timing. Walk right up to the hot seat.
And I have 5 questions for you. We have 10 minutes, and if there are any questions left over, or if there's any time left over, rather, the council can ask you some additional questions.
All righty, thanks.
Please describe the role of the Planning Commission and that of a commissioner.
The role of the Planning Commission, as I see it, is to make quasi-judicial decisions about land use actions that affect the city. The role of a commissioner, in my mind, I made this mistake when I first joined commissions years ago. A commissioner should not come to the commission with an agenda of their own. There are, eight different minds up there, all thinking different things. And even in my mind, a commissioner that comes to a meeting with their mind already made up how they're going to vote on a certain issue is making a mistake, because there's bound to be something they're going to hear at the hearing that would change their mind. So they need to be a person ready to compromise, discuss, be prepared to change their minds at any given moment on any given topic.
What specific skills would you bring to the Planning Commission? And what's the most important skill for a planning commissioner to have?
Well, like I already said, I think the most important skill a planning commissioner should have is an ability to change their mind when they hear reasonable debate that goes against what they're already thinking. The skills that I bring, I'm a city planner by trade. I have a graduate degree in urban planning. I've been doing planning work now for 30, 35 years, and I think that these are applicable skills to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Should planning code always be followed?
Yes, but there are different ways to follow a code. Each code comes with, 9 ways to skin cats, and if one code section doesn't work, almost always you can find a different code section that will. There are code sections that contradict each other, some that support each other, but my career in planning and my work on different commissions show that there's always that different way to skin the cat. And yes, code should be followed, but be aware that there are different ways to do that following based on what's stated in the code.
Please describe your experience with land use and municipal planning, or how your experience is relevant to the role of Planning Commission.
So, as I mentioned, I have a graduate degree in planning. My first job out of grad school was at the city of Irvine in California. They have a very different approach to planning than any other jurisdiction I worked in. I think there's only one other jurisdiction in the U.S. that is a master plan community like Irvine was. So that was a great set of initial skills for me to acquire as a beginning planner. I also worked in Washington County by Portland, got a lot of experience with different transit issues and overcrowding and a burgeoning population. I stayed with that job. When I went to Arizona, learned a little more about county planning at Pima County. I've worked here at RVCOG, where there was a lot of regional planning experience acquired. I planned for a year over in the city of Rogue River, and I've been here with the county now, Public Works of Josephine County, for 6 years. All these planning experiences, I think, have given me a great background to sit on a commission and help 7 other people make good decisions for the community.
Thank you. Describe how you would use the city's codes and other information to balance the rights of a property owner versus those of a neighbor or groups of people if you find they are in conflict on an application.
You know, I've seen some of these ugly neighbor disputes go all the way to court, and they are never pleasant experiences, but there's always a solution somewhere. If one can't be found in the land use code, I'm sure a judge and or a jury can find solutions to these bigger disputes. But when I get 2 neighbors in a room and I try to get them talking to each other, it's always good to remind them that what happens on this property maybe is unfavorable to the person over here, but this is a trade-off. There's always things that you won't like about your neighbor. One of my favorite stories about this is when Oregon was trying to make marijuana legal, and people were coming out of the woodwork. Some of them were, and you know, I don't have any biases towards any groups of people or anything, but the complaint was the smell of marijuana. And I remember the mayor in the city of Rogue Rivers, where this story happened, she was saying, well, next we're going to be hearing from the vegans when their neighbors fire up their barbecue. And you know, some of these neighborhood spats are not quite as big a deal as people like to think. So just getting the 2 people in a room and talking to each other, I think, is a great way to get harmony in the neighborhood. I've lived next to a neighbor who didn't like me, and it was a miserable experience. So I try to keep people from this if you can.
Thank you. Council, do you have any questions? Rob?
Yeah, thank you for coming today. And everything I hear about you and the Planning Commission is your role in the Planning Commission is very favorable.
Well, thank you
So,
for that.
yeah, you
Appreciate that.
appear to be doing a really good job. So just a quick question. Do you see, with all your experience, are there any unique challenges to this area, to Grants Pass or Josephine County, than you've seen in other places?
I'm going to say yes, and you're going to think I'm copping out based on the issue that I'm going to mention here, but I have, over time, the homeless issue has been creeping up on all of us. And this is the first community where the homeless issue now is right in front of my face. And there's no saying, oh yeah, that happens at a park on the other side of town. The city's facing this lawsuit. And I'm thinking that the city has filed an appeal, and that's the stage that we're at now. I see this homeless issue as being quite the crisis for town. We've got our flagship park, so where people are now allowed to stay, and I know that creates a lot of bad blood in the community. This issue is boiling up to a head, and I don't think we've seen the apex of it yet. It's coming, and the Planning Commission is ready to take a role in that however they can to try and find a favorable outcome for the homeless and for the city's residents. It's going to be tricky and hard, but there's got to be a way to do that.
Valerie?
Yes, hello, Eric. Yes, and I do appreciate what you do. I do read all your minutes, and there's some long minutes in there, so in the packets. But I do have a question, and going through the packets, I'm assuming that your position is open and you are reapplying for your position. Is that correct?
That's what I've been told, yes.
And that there is also a vacant position. Am I correct with that?
That's correct. There still is a vacancy on the county side.
It is on the county side.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I was unsure of as to that you were going, but I saw that with vacancy, but that is a county side vacancy that needs to be filled and not a city.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, that clarifies my question. Thank you.
Sure.
Rick?
Thank you, Eric, for reapplying. In the time you've been on the Planning Commission at this point, have you observed teamwork, and do you feel you've played a part in that interaction?
Yes and yes. My time here has not been a 4-year term. I came on board when somebody either quit or they had passed away. I can't remember which, but I believe this Planning Commission is great as a team. There are team players throughout. Some people, as I mentioned when I started talking here today, come on commission with their own agenda. But I have found that those individuals stay individual for one meeting, maybe two, and then they get the gist of it and how we're all trying to make a decision as a body. I'm seeing great teamwork on the commission that we have now. There has been some individual issues, and quite frankly, this is the first commission I've been on where I've actually seen those and been a part of them. Actually, when I say be a part of it, I just try to get each side to calm down, try to meet in the middle. But even with all that, I'm seeing a great amount of teamwork on the commission that we have now.
Thank you.
No, sure.
Any other questions? All right, well, thanks for being here today, Eric. And I should have explained earlier, but I failed to before Catherine left, that the council will be making the decision on Wednesday evening at the business meeting, and then we will let you know either way if you are appointed to the commission.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all the volunteer work that you folks are doing. I think you're doing a great job here in town, and I appreciate being up here trying to get on the commission again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. All right, council. Do you have anything we need to discuss on this before Wednesday night? No. Okay. We are going to make a quick agenda amendment here and move, I'm not sure what you have in front of you. I guess we're moving Housing Advisory Committee to the next spot. I have two different things here. One says it's second and one said it's third, but we're doing it next. So I see Doug is already here and we don't want to keep him waiting. So who is going to be our presenter on the Housing Advisory Committee motion?
We have Amber Neek, who is the Housing and Neighborhood Specialist, and I gave her a heads up that she wouldn't need to be here right away, so, but she's waiting. I can just get her really quick.
Okay, that would be great.
You bet.
Just know that those survey results are going to take a little while and we don't want to keep our committee volunteer waiting. Let's just take a 5-minute recess.
Hello.
It is, hang on, we have about 2 minutes before we restart.
Of course.
Hey, how about them ducks, huh?
Waiting for the TV to come on in the back. Hey, look, we're live again. Thanks for rushing down here, Amber. Go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All right. I'm here with Doug to present to you the Housing Advisory Committee motion for allocating ARPA funds. So I'll go ahead and switch slide. So the Housing Advisory Committee made 3 separate motions that kind of stack into each other. The first one would be the Housing Advisory Committee recommends council set aside $2 million in funds to subsidize the costs associated with the development of affordable housing projects as defined by ARPA guidelines. The program would include the creation and distribution of an RFP process where these grant proposals are reviewed and recommended to council by the Housing Advisory Committee and allocated within ARPA timelines. The Housing Advisory Committee has identified the following grants pass affordable housing projects as examples for funding consideration. So, Habitat for Humanity, All Care Foundation Cottage Development, Cathedral Square, Ramsey, Nebraska, Urban Campground. These would be examples of what these types of funds could be used on. The second motion is that the remaining funds from that initial amount could be used for infrastructure throughout the urban growth boundary in strategic locations to jumpstart development. These areas of development will be treated as reimbursement districts, restraining these to the Affordable Housing Fund. Restricting these to the Affordable Housing Fund. And motion 3 would be remaining funds as well from the initial amount could be used to purchase land for affordable housing projects within the urban growth boundary, and affordable being defined by the ARPA guidelines. The relationship to city goals within the strategic plan, these would help facilitate sustainable and manageable growth, provide cooperative shared leadership involving council, staff, and community. In Comprehensive Plan Goal 9, under housing, is to encourage the provision of adequate numbers of housing units within the urban growth boundary at price ranges and rent levels commensurate with the financial capabilities of area households, and to allow for flexibility of housing type, density, location, and design. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Doug if you had any comments.
Yeah, thank you. So the last time we brought a motion to you a couple months back about the ARPA funds, you all asked us to go back and try to find greater detail or projects where the ARPA funds might be focused towards, with the notion or with the background idea that you have a timeline where which you have to spend the ARPA funds, and you wanted to make sure these funds were dedicated and then get spent in time to be used. So we went back and we talked about and asked for various projects, which are in the pipeline but aren't far enough along to present a grant proposal to city. Habitat and the All Care Foundation Cottage Development Project. Neither of those 2 projects are far enough along to present a budget item with a request or a grant proposal to Housing Advisory Committee or to the housing staff people to say, we'd like money to pay for sidewalks or this or that. They're not far enough along for that. So we didn't find that we have the ability to give you all a greater detailed proposal focused on one project or not. So then our next thought was, okay, we're going to say sort of the same thing. Please set aside some money from the ARPA funds for housing. And if timeline is not met, then motion number 2, can you pull those back up again, please? Motion number 2 and then motion number 3 would eventually kick in if the monies aren't spent on projects. The other difficulty we had with recommending a particular project is we don't have a grant process built yet. So we would be saying, okay, we understand what Habitat for Humanity is and we know their track record, so let's go ahead and recommend them. Well, we felt like there should be a grant proposal process so that an entity other than Habitat or whomever could come forward and say, hey, we'd like to apply for some funds for something. And that process is not there yet. So we felt both, we don't have the details from Habitat or from the All Care Cottage Development Project, and we don't have the RFP or the grant process built yet. So we didn't think it was appropriate to say, please give money to this particular project. So that's where we came up with items number 2 and number 3. If projects don't come forward within the proper timeline, in order to get the ARPA funds spent, number 2 and number 3 would kick in. And 2, I think, would run concurrently right now, because it's going to take some time to identify appropriate infrastructure projects to speed up development. And then number 3 is just basically it's buying land that could be used for affordable projects with whatever funding is left over. Any questions on those?
Questions, Joel, then Valerie?
Doug, thank you for coming today. So the $2 million, when you talk about under motion 2 and 3, that's the remaining funds of the $2 million, not the $5 million?
Correct. Although the 5 would be great, if that's what you're so inclined.
Yeah, I understand.
Totally fine with that.
Okay. What can I say with the response to that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Just say okay.
I just wanted to
Just say
clarify that,
okay.
because it was unclear to me what you were asking for.
Right.
And then if I understood you correctly, we don't have the details together yet on what that would be, but that would be in response to the RFP, where those details would be available. Is that, so for example, like Cathedral Square or the All Care Foundation Cottage Development, what exactly those are and where they would be and
Right, those projects are not far enough along yet to present a budget item for you all to fund or some way to ask.
So then, like with Ramsey in Nebraska, where we already had a RFP and we had 3 responses, what would you anticipate additional beyond that?
What additional projects or what would come from Ramsey?
The new RFP on Ramsey in Nebraska, what would you anticipate that it would include that the old one didn't, that was unsuccessful?
Well, the new, I think RFP is the wrong acronym to use. I think it's a grant proposal. So the people that might develop Ramsey, Nebraska would come and say, can we have a grant for X? Right? So I think RFP is the wrong proposal. So there's already an RFP proposal or RFP for the Ramsey, Nebraska, and that's a separate entity, a separate issue proposal than this would be. So they're not going to be the same, if that makes sense or not. So don't look at them as the same and say, well, you already got a Ramsey, Nebraska proposal, because they're going to be different animals.
Okay, thank you.
Valerie?
Hello, Doug. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, hi.
I have a question on the affordable housing. I know that 60% of the median income is considered low-income housing, correct? And if I'm not mistaken, I think 80% is considered moderate income. So 60 and 80% qualify under the affordable housing. What I'm unsure of is where exactly does workforce housing fall into affordable housing, or does it not? And the reason I say that, because in talking with many of the businesses and people in town, one of the needs is workforce housing, not just low-income housing. So I'm wondering, does that fit under what we call affordable housing or not? I don't know. That is my question.
Amber would know the numbers of 60 and 80 and whatnot and what the definitions are. Workforce housing, I don't think has a very clean definition, and it'll be defined, if it needs to be defined, it'll be defined in the grant proposal process or what somebody applies for in a grant. So I can't answer your question, but somebody who makes 80% of the average income is in the workforce and has got a job, it's workforce housing. So I think that's kind of a loose term. I don't think there's a clean definition for it?
Well, I did actually look it up because, quite honestly, I was doing my homework. And they call it between 80% and 140% is basically what they consider to be workforce housing. And I do know, like I said, that is a real need in our community as in terms of just doing affordable. So I just don't want to close ourselves off in everything we do to make everything have to be for people that are 38,000 and below, because I know there's a need as well for that other piece of housing. So that's kind of that's what my question comes from. That's where it comes from.
And I think, I'm glad you brought that question up, because that's guidance that you all are going to need to give to Amber when she creates the grant process and say, okay, we don't want to just stick to what's 60% or lower. We want to open it up to 100% or something like that. And I think that's appropriate guidance that you would give to us, the Housing Committee, and to Amber when that granting proposal gets developed.
Thank you.
And just a statistic to add into that for workforce housing, almost 50% of households in Grants Pass would qualify for very low under the HUD definition. And that is the lowest rung, well, below, as opposed to extremely low. So that's the second to lowest rung they have for income limit. It's almost 50% of our households here in Grants Pass
Below the,
are at or below very low for HUD's definition.
which is 28,000 would be 60% of the median housing. So you're saying that 50% of the homes in
Individuals.
Grants
Sorry.
Pass are below the 28,000?
Correct.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yep, thanks for being here, Doug. So with regards to that first motion, I just have a question. I know earlier this year, there was the Project Turnkey that was coming out of the state to, and we were working on, or you guys were actually working on trying to get a hotel for transitional housing.
Correct.
Is a project like that something that would fit into this category, or is that something different?
I would assume it would, but again, I think that detail would be built into the grant process and what the language of the grant says. With nonprofits that give money away, they say, this is our grant process, this is what qualifies and doesn't qualify. So I think in that language would be what would allow that type of a project to fit or not fit.
Yeah, a project turnkey thing would likely be an allowable use under the ARPA guidelines.
Yeah. Was that your question, the ARPA guidelines?
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Vanessa?
Welcome, Amber. I think this is your first presentation to council, and thank you, Doug, for all of your work on this topic. With your experience, do you have any idea as to how long typically reimbursement districts exist for?
I think it's indefinite. I think it goes on the covenants of the home, I think. I don't know, legal counsel could say, or I don't know.
So city installed, it's in perpetuity. If it's private, it's up to 15 years.
Okay. Are there any potential concerns with the ARPA funds potentially being recirculating through a reimbursement district after 2024, 2026?
I don't think so. There's discussion in the ARPA guidelines with regards to grants, whether it be a grant or a loan. And there is a big gray area where we would not recommend a loan if you were going to do a loan program. So my recollection of the readings of ARPA, if the dollars are spent and utilized for, say, infrastructure to incentivize development, if it's in the ground, it's already spent, or it is contracted out to be spent, you're okay. You have a reimbursement mechanism as a city that to recuperate some of those funds. I don't think that negates the primary use that it was put into place for. So I think you're okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Joel?
So Doug, I had a question from your perspective on that infrastructure to jumpstart development and then to restrict those just to the Affordable Housing Fund. Why would we want to put all of one income in one area like that? It seems to me like you'd want a mixed income with different mixing rather than putting all low incomes in one area. The other thing that strikes me is the people that do either make more money or have sold their house in California during a good season and are moving up and putting the rest of it in the bank and buying a really nice home, or selling it to somebody else here that's moving up. It leaves another house that's available, as you're well aware of, that's farther down the economic totem pole. So both housings have, all housing has some beneficial effect on the supply of housing in Grants Pass.
Right.
So when we restrict them to just the Affordable Housing Fund, that seems rather limited to me.
Yes, I agree, and it's not our intent for infrastructure development to only be used for low-income development. It's citywide and in strategic areas that bring greater return areas that are going to get developed. And those aren't all affordable housing. So there's a confusion in our wording then if it says that.
Okay, so
You're
then
talking
where
about
where it
motion
says restricted these to the Affordable Housing Fund, you would, that really is in error, and you'd change that to
Are
something
you on
else?
number 2? Which
Yeah,
motion?
number 2.
Remaining funds to be used for infrastructure throughout urban growth boundaries, strategic locations, and jumpstart development as defined by ARPA guidelines. And when those get paid back, they're paid back into the Affordable Housing Fund.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So,
But the initial investment,
and the properties then may be on the open market.
correct, and they're not necessarily all affordable.
I hear what you're saying.
Right.
Okay. The other thing I had, well, it probably belongs under discussion, so I'll save it till then. I was just, the income in our community and the characteristics of it and why it's so low. And, because it's been there a long time. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you. Council, did you want to discuss this now, or it is tied into our, survey results, ARPA discussion, if you want to hold off and talk about it later? Okay. In that case, we will move into hearing what the results of that ARPA survey are. And I guess for the viewers at home, I will say ARPA stands for American Rescue Plan Act. Sometimes we get complaints about using too many acronyms. Sometimes I forget what the acronyms mean, so. Hello, welcome. I think they're having trouble hearing you. Is that mic on?
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Susan Clark, and I'm staff with the Finance Department. And today I am here to present the findings. I am sorry, my presentation notes are not appearing. Thank you.
Hit the wrong one. Come here. Escape. Down. That should be it. No, it's not.
This is Amber's.
There you go. Oh, that's
Wait.
Amber's. Oh, okay. Escape. Where's yours? This is yours?
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. So today I'm here to present the Household and Business Survey findings for the use of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And before we begin, I just wanted to provide a couple of reminders and an update on ARPA reporting. I just want to remind everyone that this survey is about the preferences for using the ARPA funds. In particular, that was what they were asked about. It's not general findings for what the city should be doing. And that on the survey, there were questions that said check all that apply. And responses to questions that say check all that reply actually reflect the frequency of the categories being chosen, not the percentage of people who chose them. I know this sounds very nuanced, but I will talk more about that when it comes up in the slide, but I just want to keep that in mind and put it out there for anyone who's just looking at the slides. And then additionally, additional analysis can be performed is requested down the line if there's something more you'd like. And then as a slight diversion from the survey, I wanted to talk about the reporting requirements. There has been an update, although the funds still need to be obligated by December 2024 and all funds expended by December 2026. Originally, the federal government had asked for an interim report about what we were doing with the funds on August 31st, and then they learned that there was not much to report. They extended it to October 31st, and then they learned that many cities still were not quite there yet. And so they extended it to December 31st. And then they came out with another set of rules. And for cities who are under 250,000 and have received less than $10 million, we will report our findings in April 2022 for the period of March 3rd, 2021 when we receive them through April 30th of 2022. So at that time, we'll report our first interim report for what we plan to do and our progress on that. So they recognize many cities still have not finalized, how they're going to spend all their funds. So then we will move to annual reports instead of quarterly reports. So I thought you should know that, and that more guidance will be coming out on what's expected in those reports. Okay. So this presentation, just a brief overview, will cover the survey methodology briefly. We'll talk about the household survey findings first, then the business survey findings. There'll be time for questions on the surveys, and then I will turn it over to Aaron for City Council to give staff direction. All right. Okay. So just as a reminder, we conducted an all-household survey and all city and former city registered businesses from January of 2020. That resulted in a mailing of 13,548 letters to households and 1,746 to businesses and former businesses. We chose to conduct an all-household survey as a group because we could get statistically valid responses, just as we could have gotten them with a random survey of all. But when one can have the time and the opportunity to do an all-participant survey, that is the ideal, if you can do it. And so we did the ideal, just like the U.S. Census does it every 10 years. They survey every household, and you do random later down the road when you need more information. It also gives us a great baseline if we were to do additional things randomly. We were about a week behind almost to the day in getting the survey out, and we moved the deadline from the original October 15th to October 22nd to be sure that those who requested a mail-in survey had time to actually get it, fill it out, and respond. So I am here this week, a week later than anticipated. But we did mail a thank you reminder and postcard on October 13th. We also, I need to thank many people here. We also received many phone calls for which the customer service department handled. And, whoops, sorry. My apologies. I am not skilled in this. Well, I don't have a quicker way to do this, I don't think. So my apologies. I'd like to acknowledge the many phone calls, dozens of phone calls that the customer service group handled regarding URLs, surveys, and mailing surveys to residents and businesses. I'd also like to acknowledge the GIS technician who created the mailing list, as well as unique codes that went to everyone to prevent ballot stuffing. Also, city administration staff who put on the web page frequently asked questions and ultimately, the longer URL for people to access the survey, and as well as sent out Twitters and notifications on Facebook through social media to reach people. And also the Small Business Association and the Chamber of Commerce also promoted the survey to the business community. So we made many efforts to reach people. Then the survey closed on October 22nd, and we received 2 requests for surveys to be completed online in Spanish. We had 2 surveys completed online in Spanish and none requested to be mailed. We had 50 requests for paper copies, and of those 25 were completed. In your packets, you have exhibits A, B, C, D, and E, which are copies of the letter that was signed by the mayor that went out, the postcard, the household survey, the business survey, and finally in Exhibit E is the compilation of all of the written responses to the others' questions as well as the general comments. We have all of those available to you. Okay. So those were our methods. So the household survey findings, we received over 775 responses, which was 5%. And this map is what we call a heat map, which is one of 2 that our GIS technician made for us, which I think are pretty groovy. And they show the geographical distribution of the responses of the survey. The darker brown is where we received more responses than others. I want to emphasize that this is a statistically calculated spatial location, so we are not identifying anyone's home or any one block per se, but it gives us a good idea of what the distribution of the responses were. So as you can see, they came from all over the city. And what we had in returns means that we had a 99% confidence interval is what we reached in our responses, with a margin of error of less than 5%, of exactly 0.045%. So we can be 99% certain that if we were to do the survey over and over again, we would get the same outcomes. We also know that the margin of error is less than 5%, so that we can be pretty confident that the findings we have represent the true population. So, okay, so as a reminder, the list of funding categories for which we can use ARPA funds is what we put on the survey. So these are the areas for which the funds that we've received from the federal government we can use. So supporting public health, addressing negative impacts, services to disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay for essential workers, and infrastructure investments. If at some later date we receive funding for lost revenue or something, there might be other ways we can spend the money, but this is what we're allowed to spend it on. Starting with the first question on the survey, we asked citizens, residents, if it were up to them, how would they prioritize spending the ARPA funds? And as you can see, infrastructure investments was the most frequently selected category, followed by services to disproportionately impacted communities at 48.6, and then negative economic impacts, premium pay for essential workers, and ultimately support for public health needs. What I do want to emphasize about this is that these are the frequencies at which people selected these categories. They are not the categories that they are necessarily their priority. And this is where we're getting into that check all applies is nuanced. You can see by the count at the bottom of the screen here, there were 1,671 selections. There were only 775 households that returned a survey. So people could select more than one option. So someone could have selected support for public health needs and nothing else. So that would have been their #1 priority. Someone could have selected negative economic impact, services to disproportionately impacted communities, and infrastructure investments, but their priority was negative economic impacts. And we actually had that written in a general comment. Someone said, I selected all 5, but these are my top 2 priorities. So I just want to bear that in mind. That's the way that one works. And we can talk more about that if you like. So what I've done with the questions, so we can kind of...
Joel, go ahead with your question.
Yes.
So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories, it seems like they're not entirely independent of each other. So for example, if you address negative economic impacts, it could be for disproportionately impacted communities, or the businesses could be, or the workers, essential workers, premium pay may be impacted. Or did you intend them as completely independent categories?
So these are the categories that are in the legislation.
Okay.
And
okay.
so the options, this is a very good question, because the options that we provide under each of these, I'm just going to slip to the next slide and illustrate what I mean.
But that wasn't in the legislation. That's our interpretation of the legislation, correct? This next step?
No, this is where I'm getting to.
Okay.
So the options within those categories were taken from the U.S. Treasury's reporting and compliance on each of those categories, and they provided options. It's in Appendix A of that guidance and reporting on pages 30 and 31. And these options are the ones that they're expecting us to report on, not that we couldn't find some other item that we could say was because of COVID, that we had a negative impact on a community, and therefore we can do an other. But these are the ones that they have already come up with that are eligible. We would have to make an argument for anything that was other and demonstrate that it was because of COVID and that it fit into this category. So does that clarify? Okay, perfect. So I did these charts similar to a heat map where, this is not a heat map, but similar to it, where the darker color indicates that there's more frequency of selection as a first, second, or third priority and so on, so that you could readily see among all these numbers which ones are the key ones. So for this first chart, which seems to be missing its heading. How strange.
It is there on the printout.
It's on the printout. Yes, we have it. Yeah, and it's on one of my slides, but not the other. That's so interesting.
So this one is for support for public health needs due to COVID-19.
Oh, there it is. I guess, I'm not sure what that was. Yes, that's very interesting. So anyway, providing personal protective gear. Was the mental health services was the first priority for this category, followed by PPE, and then community violence interventions was the third priority for spending money under this category. So basically for the 30-some-odd%, the 30.1% of people who selected this category, these were their priorities: mental health, providing personal protective gear, and community violence interventions. You'll notice that substance use services is relatively flat, unlike community violence interventions is clearly the third choice there. Moving to the next slide. Oh, this is... There we go. So this is a new category. This is negative economic impacts. It's in the color blue that we saw on the original chart. And This was, the first priority is food programs, the second priority is rent, mortgage, and utility aid, and everything else falls pretty far below that. What I would also point out, though, that clearly people indicated cash transfers was not a priority, with almost 50% saying this is not how they would want the funds to be spent. There were many comments on this for the other household assistance. People wrote in options for this. Comments covered a broad range of things, from child care, which was noted 16 times, assistance with home or yard maintenance was mentioned 12, and other frequently mentioned items included helping with utility bills and addressing homelessness for this. So of the, let me go back up, of the 40.1% people who selected negative economic impacts as a category that was a priority for them. And then they chose under this category, general economic assistance. The first priority was small business and economic assistance, with a close tie between aid for nonprofits and aid to tourism, travel, and hospitality. There were also 92 households that actually wrote comments, then didn't just put NA or none in this. And 17 of the responses highlighted assistance to small business projects, small businesses or projects that generate income was a frequent comment. And then for this next area, which was other economic assistance, I want to point out that there were actually 9 options that people could choose from. And so that has resulted in 2 things. One, the percentages look a lot smaller because they had to choose across so many categories. But also that this slide will cross over to PowerPoint slides. This category will cross over to PowerPoint slides. Enhancing business retention and efforts to broaden the industrial base of our community were first and second choices for utilizing the ARPA funds or priorities. And then the next unique priority was comprehensive planning and extensive community engagement. If we go to the next page, for other economic assistance, we find that new outdoor recreation trail infrastructure and public access enhancements is the 4th out of 9. So that kind of rounds out your top 4. What I do want to point out is on the top item up here on this page, upgrades for retrofits to travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation infrastructure for the functionality under social distance conditions was the top, not a priority. So when we added, when it's outdoor recreation, they're interested in it. If it's just for social distancing, they're not interested in doing those kinds of upgrades. Okay, among the top comments under other for this, and I would say the comments started to vary widely now, from roads for growing redwood traffic to access to public transportation and helping senior citizens, and projects that leveraged other funds such as urban renewal renovation grants. But the trends among the comments really were around small businesses being mentioned 9 times, helping them, and addressing homelessness, which was mentioned 7 times, and affordable housing and parks. When they're talking about parks, they were talking about safety and maintenance of the parks, were both mentioned at least 4 times. So those were kind of the ones that were very specifically mentioned. Okay, now I see what happened. So for services to disproportionately impacted communities, that was selected 48.6% times as a priority for ARPA funds. And within this category, the top priority clearly is affordable housing at 63.4%, saying that's their first priority, followed at 46%, almost half, for services for the unhoused. There were many comments on this. Actually, 209 people wrote in responses, which was the highest for any of the categories. And chief among them were 26 people mentioning wraparound type services for the homelessness, from counseling to job training to porta potties, clothing drives, and general social service counseling. 24 people mentioned transitional housing, and some provided specific ideas on what it might look like. So I truly encourage you to read Exhibit E when you have some time, because people are actually giving ideas of what they like it to look like, and they're giving you more context about why they're saying things. 16 people mentioned mental health services, and another 15 mentioned affordable housing, even though affordable housing was already a category in here. So they're making an exclamation point or some sort of punctuation mark there.
Susan, we have a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
I have a question first, and then Valerie. Is it fair to say if we add like the first and second priority, let's say affordable housing has 63.4 and 26.5, if we add those together, that 90% of people who responded to that question put that as their first or second priority? Is that?
Yes, that is fair to say. It becomes an issue when you have a competing, not a priority. So when you have, if you had 63% saying yes, it's a priority, and 20% saying it's not a priority, then it's, you have to weigh that in. But in this case, just adding across the row, that would be a fair way to say it.
Okay. Valerie?
Yes, you keep referring to being able to read the comments somewhere, so I guess where would we, because it's not in this packet, the comments.
That's correct. It's in, I'd hope that you had received exhibits A through E.
No.
Okay, we will be sure to get them to you.
Yes, because we don't have them. So I see everybody kind of looking around for something, and so I'm not the only one searching. Thank you.
My apologies. I only printed the slides, not the exhibits.
Okay.
But I will get them to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Great. So the next category that people could have selected as a priority for using ARPA funds was for premium pay. And of the 33.2% who chose premium pay as a category of priority for using the funds, we asked them about what's the lowest amount you would want to provide for premium pay and what was the highest amount. For the lowest amount, we had responses from zero, one person saying zero, to 58 people saying $13. The average for the lowest amount of premium pay was $7.95, and the median was $7. So the median being the 50th percentile, the 50th, if it were out of 100, the person in the middle, the 50th person to have, if you ranked everything from 0 to 13, what would be that middle item? Those are noted in teal as opposed to the orange color. For the highest amount, we had, went from $0 to 13 as well, but we had 124 respondents indicate the highest would be 13. Actually, to be honest, there was someone who said they wanted it to be $22, but I can only go to 13 on this because that's what the legislation says. So the median for this was $13 and the average was $10.82. The reason why I've gone to the trouble to give you both the median and the average is when you have data that is not like a nice, beautiful bell-shaped curve, when you have data that's skewed, where on the lowest amount it's bimodal, we have a high number at $3 and a high number at 13, or when it's highly skewed up or to 13 or highly skewed down to 0, it's more representative if you can only use one number to use the median. When it's a nice bell curve, the average is great for getting you that middle number. Okay. I think that's really all I wanted to say about that one. So when the survey takers were asked if it was up to you, how would you allocate $100 among the following infrastructure areas? The options we provided are the ones that we're allowed to provide under the ARPA funds that they can be used for. The first was adding additional money to help pay for a new water treatment plant, and this was selected more often than any of the other responses. We had 446, which is 90 times more than the least often selected, which is completing broadband. The average amount, and I will tell you for each one of these options, someone said $0 and someone said 100. So they ranged from 0 to 100 on each one of these. But the average amount for the water treatment plant was $47.10, almost half. And then for the other three items, it was about a quarter of the funds, a quarter of that $100. The other thing I would like to point out is the standard deviation for the money for the water treatment plant was much higher, $28, than what you find for the other three items. So that means for the water treatment plant, most of the data, most of the responses said somewhere between, 68% of the responses were somewhere between $19 and $75. That's where you found most of the data. But for something like improving stormwater, which had the second most improving stormwater systems, this is a much smaller standard deviation, so people were much closer to the number of $24, a much tighter band around the 60% would have been closer. Yes?
So it's been a long time since I did my t-tests and statistics. But it looks like to me the interpretation then would be at one standard deviation, there is no statistical significance between these options. Am I interpreting that correctly?
I did not run a t-test to know if there is a statistically significant difference.
We're just looking at the standard deviation, though, on the average, it would lead one in that direction.
I would say that's more likely to be true for the other three options, that the wastewater treatment plant might be, but I would like to run the test before I committed to that. Councilor King. Yes?
I just have a question, because I look at this and say, okay, $100 on infrastructure areas regarding the water treatment plant, conserving water, stormwater, and broadband. Another aspect of infrastructure is piping. Is that something that we just didn't, in terms of getting the water out to areas? Because that to me is infrastructure, and yet it's not on this choice. Is that because it comes directly from the legislative ARPA?
Yes, these
Okay.
options came from what was approved to be used for infrastructure for ARPA funds from the kind that we've received.
Okay, so if we did infrastructure, but it was in order to promote affordable housing, it could be done under the affordable housing in terms of getting infrastructure out? I guess that's my question.
Yes, we could make that argument if that helps get affordable housing. Yes, that's my understanding.
All right, thank you.
We don't actually have to use all the pillars either. You could put it 100% to one, so I don't think we need to work too hard at making things fit.
I just wanted to, like I said, understand that, infrastructure on the survey was very specific to that and not the other. And so infrastructure is kind of one of those funny words that, if that's all you're looking at in infrastructure, you're right. Anyway, I'm just getting that background. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the general comments from the household survey, this was pretty impressive. I feel that the people who took the survey took it seriously, and somebody even wrote that on there. But they took it very seriously when we look at the quality of the comments. It's really reflective of that. Half of the people who took the survey wrote general comments, so you have 72 pages of things to read in Exhibit E. Let's see. Given the vast number of responses, I am only highlighting here the top 10 of 78 categories that I found when I was reading through them and trying to categorize them. Incidentally, these all, the top 10 categories all were double digits in terms of responses. So, more than 10 people said this item. The findings reveal that addressing homelessness as the top comment about how to use ARPA funds, followed by the water treatment plant, affordable housing, infrastructure for roads and bridges, which at this time, unless one were to make an argument under one of the pillars, is not one of the infrastructure items. Public health services, more money for police, then assisting businesses impacted, the greatest needs, not non-essentials, and improving aging infrastructure. And they're really talking about 911 communications, power, gas, those kinds of systems, and city beautification. Those were the top comments. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the business survey. So we had, and I'm probably going to go a little quicker since we're all kind of familiar now with the topics, 81 of the 1,746 responded. That turned out to be 5% of our businesses and former businesses. And of that 5%, 95% of the responses were from current businesses, that not the former ones. The responses resulted in a margin of error of 9%, so under 10%, but we only have a confidence interval of 90%. So this means that we're 90% sure we'd get the same findings if we were to do the business survey over, and we have, a 10% chance of error that we wouldn't. And the margin of error is under 10%. So we're not quite as confident with these findings as we are with a household, but they're still pretty solid. All right. So the same categories, and their highest again was infrastructure improvements. It was not quite as high as households in terms of being frequently chosen. Addressing negative impacts was the second most frequently selected, and that was actually third for households. Premium pay is the least selected for businesses, while support for needs due to COVID was the least selected for residents. Services to disproportionately impacted communities was third, and that was actually second for households. And support for public health needs due to COVID was selected 24.7% of the time. So again, there were 81 people, but we see the count was 146. So this represents the fact that they can select more or only one. So support for public health needs due to COVID-19, the highest priority here was providing personal protective equipment, followed by community violence interventions, and then mental health services to round out the top three. There were write-in responses for this as well, and the top write-ins were supporting and promoting vaccinations and education around COVID-19. Under the category of addressing negative impacts, very similar to the households, food programs ranked first, followed by rent, mortgage, and utility aid. And again, cash transfers were clearly not a priority for this group either, with almost 50% again saying this is not a priority for the use of these funds. For general economic assistance, small business economic assistance was far and away the first choice, 3/4 of the time. It was selected as the first priority. And then everything else was pretty much a far distant away second. But aid to tourism, travel, and hospitality was a clear third. Trends for this in the comments were around helping small businesses to reopen or assisting them with expenses due to mandates or payroll needs. Under other economic assistance, which was 9 categories long, and this too will cross over 2 slides, we find the same top 2, enhancing businesses' retention and expansion programs, and efforts to broaden the industrial base in our community. The third choice was tourism marketing and local promotion campaigns. Oh, I'm sorry, was the fourth choice. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that the third choice, when you add these together, supersedes what it would have been for tourism over the top three, was new outdoor recreation trail infrastructure and public access. Again, like the household survey, almost, a quarter said they were not interested in upgrades for social distancing to outdoor recreation. Other economic assistance suggestions, 10 people responded to this, and they were varied from assistance to the elderly, addressing homelessness, more multifamily permits, public safety, and assisting businesses to offset the expenses due to COVID, or some of them. Again, affordable housing ranked first under the category of services to disproportionately impacted communities.
Susan, I think we had a question about the
Oh, I'm
last part.
sorry.
Before we get too far ahead, on slide 20, can you please restate what the top comment was? The write-in?
Yes, I did skip that.
You said it, I missed it.
Slide 20. For general economic assistance.
Yes.
The trends on this comment, there were 12 people who wrote in, and they wanted to know how to help small businesses reopen or assist them with expenses due to the mandates or payroll needs.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So services to disproportionately impacted communities, it mirrored the households in terms of affordable housing being first priority and services to unhoused being second priority. There were many additional comments on this category, just like it was for the households. And chief among them were services and programs to help the unhoused get back on their feet. Premium pay amounts turned out to be lower on average than they were for households. The average was $5.50, with the median being $5 for the least amount, and for the highest amount was $9.86, and $13 was the median. The average was $9.
Rick has a question.
Yeah.
So on the premium amounts, it indicates on the left side, a maximum, like the number of people that said for $5 would be only 3 responses?
Yep.
Out of 400 to 500 returns?
No, so we're on the business survey. There were 81 people who participated in the business survey, but only 20%, 19.8% selected this as a priority. So of those 19 or 20% who selected this category, we only had 16 responses. We only had 16 people respond to this.
Okay, thank you. That helps me.
So when we asked if it was up to you, how would you allocate $100 among each of the following infrastructure areas? Again, the average amount arranged from 0 to 100 for each category, and the amount for additional amount for the water treatment plant was $65 on $100, so more than half. The other, similarly to the households, the other respondents were about a quarter of the funds to go to the other options. And again, the standard deviation, and this one is actually tightest around conserving water, but also had the fewest responses. So general comments from the business survey. The things that stood out in the comments were they're assisting local businesses impacted and addressing homelessness. And we saw this on the, for the households too, they're listing other kinds of infrastructure, like here they're listing roads and sidewalks. On the household one, they did bridges, roads, sidewalks, and lighting, all under one infrastructure category. I kind of grouped that together. But there was also that other kind of infrastructure that was listed on the household that isn't here, which was infrastructure, aging infrastructure for, gas and power and communications.
Ma'am, could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So when you talked about extrapolating the survey to the rest of the population, so for example, the general comments from the business survey, the most got 5 comments, the least got 2 comments out of the number of surveys that we sent out and got back. And you're saying to me that that would be reflected in the general survey too, that low number of?
Not the low number, but rather the
difference between those 5 people and the 2 people reflect the general population? Is that what you're telling me?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to confuse the matter.
Okay.
What I'm saying is the assistance for local businesses impacted ranked the highest here, and addressing the homeless ranked the highest. And I skipped to talking about here there was infrastructure, and that it was specifically roads and sidewalks, where when we talked about infrastructure in the households, people were talking about roads, bridges, sidewalks, and lighting.
So specifically though, the statistical significance of, for example, more money for police, for public safety, and assisting local businesses impacted. 5 people had had that, and 2 people had the other. Are you telling me that that was statistically significant for the population as a whole?
I am telling, when we talk about statistical significance for the survey right now, I'm talking about the findings of the survey in general being valid of the entire community. I did not run statistical tests among differences among items or among questions or questions by demographics.
All right, so I would guess that at this point in time, the design of the survey would not deem this to be statistically significant from each other. I
cannot say that without actually running a statistical test.
Sure.
But
okay.
we have data that is representative of the population, therefore I can actually run statistics on it. What we can say is that these findings are representative of our population. Whether or not there's differences between assisting local businesses impacted and infrastructure, which only had 2, whether there's a statistically significant difference between those 2 items, I can tell you that if I run the test.
All right, so to me, it tells me that 5 people responded to one and 2 people responded to the other, and to go beyond that might be a...
So this is a qualitative analysis of general comments, where I read all the comments and I checked a box. So this comment's about this comment also talks about this.
Sure.
So someone could have talked about 3 things, and there would be 3 check marks, because it's a qualitative analysis. So to do a qualitative analysis, to find out a statistically significant difference on a qualitative analysis, we would have to get 3 people to read. We would have to have concurrence that they're all saying the same thing. Then I would need to run an inner reliability score on our raters, and then I could test the data for statistical significance.
So if I hear you
this is
correctly...
just reflecting general comments to give you a sense of what was most often said.
Okay, so this is a qualitative, not a quantitative. And so to read anything into statistical significance on this would take more work, is what I hear you saying.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly, yeah. All right. So to get to the demographics, and I'm going to point out that I have not weighted the survey responses, but I can weight the survey responses, especially if we're going to look at them by like age or gender or something like that. So for our demographics, I put our household and our business side by side on this slide, and I've broken it out on the next slide. But we find that more females than males took the household survey, so 50% female, 42% male. The census says that Grants Pass is 52.1% female and 48.9%. So it's pretty close. In terms of age, we had a higher percentage of older people take the survey than the census. We had actually 43% of our survey takers who were 65 or older. The census says that we have 19.8, 20% of our population basically are 65 or older. If we wanted to do analysis on survey responses by age, we definitely need to wait to make sure that we're not doing the will of one group over another. The census also indicates that we have 9.3% of our population are Hispanic, while 5% of our respondents indicated they were Hispanic, Latinx, or of Spanish origin. Much like our population, according to the census, we are 90.3% white or Caucasian, and our survey respondents were actually reported to be 89% white or Caucasian. When we look at simply the household survey, the census says that we have 2.32% household size, and our survey, more than 51% are two-person households. So on average, that was 2.32 people. So also the census indicates that our household income, our median household income is $44,185. We had 35% of our residents indicate that they had a household income under $50,000. The median income category for us on the survey was between $50,000 and $74,999,000. However, I want to point out that 27% of the survey takers said they prefer not to tell us their income, which is much better than them lying and checking a box, which is why that's down there. We'd much rather have not all the data than to have bad data. So what we find also in surveys is that people who at higher incomes and lower incomes are much more likely to report their income than people in the middle. There's a whole bunch of studies on why that's the case. So that's something to keep in mind, that it's possible that a good chunk of those 27% are right there in that middle. But we won't be able to know that. And on the business survey, most of the survey respondents had 2 to 10 employees, 47%. 77% of them were under 10. And just barely a few more had a profit than had shown a loss in 2020 on their earnings for their business. So 56 to 44%.
Susan?
Yes.
I have a question. Can you go back one slide?
You bet.
So just from my understanding, the reason you collect this data is to make sure that your survey is reaching the people in the community? Is that because if it's all weighted, I don't want to say one side or one population or one, I would say race, then it's not a good, you would have difficulty validating the survey. Is that appropriate?
Right. We want to get it, that's exactly it. We would like to know if the people who took the survey are representative of our population.
Okay.
What we found out earlier with this is that if we did the survey again, we'd probably get the same group of people taking it. But if we want to say something about anybody under 65, we really need to weight the survey so we're not giving people who are 65 or older more credence or more weight in the reflecting the outcomes.
Okay, so if the city is going for a grant and they want to use this survey as part of that grant, then this statistical information is essential to show that it's really representative of the community. Is that correct?
This shows us who took the survey.
Right.
And if we weight it, then we would be able to say that the findings 100% represent the community. Because we can weight it back to what the census says our demographics are.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Rob.
And so you just said the median household income is what again?
44,185.
And then the individual, the one person, do you have that somewhere or no?
No, I just took the median because that's what we asked them here, was to tell us their median household income.
So that's just, and that excludes the 27% who didn't want to answer, is that right?
I'm sorry, I did not understand.
That excludes the 27% that says I prefer not to say, or?
The 44,185?
Yeah.
That comes from the census.
Census, okay.
So for us, let me get to the income one. Sorry. For us, the median, so if I were to line up all the survey responses and pick the one that was in the middle, that would fall in the income category of 74,999.
And that would be, I guess, excluding 27% of the people who chose not to answer, right? Right.
Exactly. It excludes those 27%, correct?
Right, okay, thank you.
Are we ready for all the questions? I think this is the last slide, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And if I didn't answer, the demographics do tell us who represented. So in terms of male and female, we're pretty close. In terms of age, we need to wait, basically. Yeah. To say anything about age.
I guess if we were interested in knowing how it skews to the actual data, then we could do that.
Yes, we can.
Okay. But it's also not necessary. If we just want to go by who actually responded, we know who responded.
Correct.
Okay. Council, do you have questions? Been asking our questions along the way. Rick?
So Susan, as a survey person, what's your general consensus of the replies that you got and the participation? I realize surveys can be, I want to say frustrating, but no matter if you go on to marketing, I used to have marketing in college, trying to get people to respond can be a real challenge. What's your take on our community?
Well, I will say I was underwhelmed when I realized it was 5%. I was really pleased with the quality of the responses and the thoughtfulness. Not many things were left blank and people didn't just jump and skip, even when they had the chance and they could write in, to do it on paper. I would say in this day and age, that 5% for a general population is not bad. I mean, when the Gallup poll goes for a survey, they're only trying to get, 3 to less than that, percent of the population. They're just surveying 1,000 people and generalizing quite large. One thing this survey gave us by doing it to the entire city, is now we know that we can expect a 5 or 6% response rate, 6% for household. And that is a great benchmark for going forward when we want to, if we should choose to do a random sample in the future, we know exactly what to expect on a return. So, I think it's put us in a good position going forward. And of course. As a researcher, I would have loved to have seen a 70% response rate. Yes, that would have been great. But I think that only happens when you have a captive target audience, like you're talking to, dog owners. What do you think about your dog? And you're able to get every dog licensed person, and something they're very personally passionate about that you could expect what I was expecting initially, which was a third.
Thank you very much.
Valerie?
Yes, thank you, and I agree. We'd all like to have more participation, but it's the passion of people who respond. Did you send it out was it water bills? What did you use for the population, for the residents that it went out? Because that's, did apartment buildings get it? I mean, how did that work? That's my question.
Yes, that's a good question. We initially thought, we will send it using the water bills. We'll just stick it in with the water bills. And then we realized not everyone who lives in the city is on city water. So this is where the GIS technician came in. We used the county assessor's office database.
Therefore, you did pick up apartment people?
We did, in a number of cases. We received 550 surveys and postcards back. So 550 people did not actually receive the letter or the postcard. And the reasons were, the biggest reason was the place was vacant. So there was nowhere to forward it to. Another big reason was there was no receptacle to put the mail in. So we assumed that was probably an empty lot, that no one was collecting mail there. There were a few no forwarding addresses, especially with the former businesses, and a variety of reasons like that. And so we also, I think it was 79 of the businesses that we tried to capture did not actually receive the mail. So 550 it was disheartening when they started coming back, but when you're sending out 13,548, not horrible, but we're going to actually try and work through and find out for future mailings if we can somehow improve at least a portion of those. There's nothing we can do about vacant houses or no mail receptacles.
Other questions? Joel?
I don't think it made a difference to the survey, but I need to ask you, so when it came to our place, my wife tried it and the online survey was down. I don't know if it was down quite a bit or not, but so then she took the extra step to call. Was it down quite a bit during the whole thing, or is that periodic, or what was going on? And did it affect the availability or people's ability to respond?
When we made it become linked through a tiny URL, that limited the capacity, and on the very first 2 or 3 days, the capacity was no more than like 10,000, I think, at any one time, which we thought was surely enough. And so it may have been a bandwidth capacity with a tiny URL. For the business URL, the server for the tiny URL in Vanuatu went down, and we then had to publish the long URL. So so I don't know that it made a big difference either, but it will be an unknown if people just gave up.
It was also household-wise, so one person could take it from the household, am I correct?
That's correct.
Because I got there first. My husband was a little ticked off. It's okay.
Well, in the frequently asked questions, I encouraged people to do it together with their spouse and talk about it. So
I also get the mail at my house, Valerie. Any other questions? I'm wondering on the kind of the initial rainbow chart, let's go to slide 6, I think.
Sure. There we go. That's an easier way.
There we go. All right, so people could pick one or all of these options. So is there any way to rank what people's overall priority was as far as spending the money?
No, not at this juncture, no. We could go back out and ask them to do that, but we're just interested in knowing which categories were important and then digging into the details of what things within that category were the highest and lowest priorities.
Okay, and then in the bottom left corner where it says count 1671, that's how many people answered that particular question?
No, that is how many selections were made. There were only 775 households that answered this question. And then from there, when you get to 30% selected that, we can't, that category was selected 30% of the time. It isn't 30% of the people selected it.
Okay. So yeah, if I picked 3 choices, then I would count as 3 instead of 1 person.
Correct. That's why the count's higher than the number of people who completed the survey.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So this slide for the business survey, I just have the same question. The count of the total votes is 1671 and the households were 775. On the other one, the count's 146. The number of businesses?
Was 81.
Okay, thank you.
And 95% of that 81 were current businesses that are currently running.
Valerie?
I do have a question that I see just finding little numbers as I examine. And on the infrastructure one, where you go back to the $100, how would you spend it? There's an N equals 1563. What does that mean? Because there it says count. And then on page, I guess it's 13 and 14, there's a little N.
Could you tell me which slide that?
Yes, 13 and 14, I believe.
Okay. Just so I can have it up here and we can all talk about it together.
That's great.
So the N is the population.
Okay.
So in this case, right.
So 210 people answered on the lowest amount, 213 answered on, is that correct?
That is correct.
And then on the next one, 14, the next slide, there's an N 1563. That's going back to the people who, because there were 1,600 or something, I think, on that count.
So the 1563 means that you could have selected more than, it's because you could have selected more than one option.
Okay.
So you could have said, I'm interested in water, more money for the water treatment plant, I'm interested in conserving water, and left the other 2 blank. So you could have put $50 on each one of those and 0 on the other.
So N just basically means participants, people who participated in that graph. I mean,
so that, in this one, I should change that into the word count.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was just curious
Right,
about.
N should reflect participants.
Okay.
And
Well,
count is the
is it
number
to reflect
selected.
answers? Like if I put, let's say, $25 on each of those 4 choices, I count as 4. If I put $100 on one choice, I count as 1.
Correct.
So it's not, it's not people, it's how many answers,
Yes.
how many times the question was answered.
It's nuanced.
Yeah. Statistics
Lot
is
of
very nuanced
information
for
to
some of us.
Sink in. Any other questions? All right.
So
There may be more at a future point, but everybody's overwhelmed with information today, so thank you, Susan.
my pleasure, and I will turn it over to Aaron for staff direction.
Council, do you want to talk about this? Thoughts to share, or are you still just soaking it all in? Valerie?
Well, I'd like to read the comments myself, just because I'm a comment reader, so I will enjoy getting that when I do get it. I think that there's some very clear direction here, but I would like some time to I've kind of been looking it over all weekend, actually, putting some pieces, but yes, I see some real direction here, so I do appreciate it. I think it will be very valuable as we move forward, and I would assume we also need to have a deadline as to when we need to make the decision, so.
Yeah, the Appendix A through E are coming to you. They'll be on the dais today for you, and that has those comments that you're looking for, so you can digest those even some more and dive into it deeper than what the presentation was today. Yeah, ultimately, I know this was a lot of information, and I think just from a staff's recommendation, we just continue to make sure it is somewhere on the horizon or up next for a discussion at some point in time, so you can provide an opportunity to have a general discussion on the dais and provide direction to council. And I understand that it's not, and we weren't expecting any recommendations coming out of today's meeting. This was just to give you the information.
Any other thoughts today? Joel?
So it's evident to all of us that the allocation of the dollars given to us from the federal government for COVID, the ARPA funds, is more ripe for a decision. And we need to move forward in a timely manner and consider all the projects that are reasonable possibilities and then make decisions. And so, go ahead.
All right, we
Mayor?
will. Yeah,
Yeah,
Aaron.
I was just going to ask if council would entertain, when I say we, from an ex-team staff perspective, we'd like to also provide you with a couple of recommendations from an internal infrastructure standpoint that we believe could be utilized for ARPA, and provide that to you also. And I can do that in a memo format, so you can have that to also consider.
Sounds good. Thank you. Joel?
So, just to be clear, and I'm not the know-it-all on this, but process-wise, it seems like we need to have all the possible projects that we're seriously considering at once, and look across them, and then have some kind of decision-making that encompasses the survey, encompasses our intuition, encompasses our logic, and make decisions as a group and move on.
We will come back at it another day. Thanks, Joel. Brian?
Yeah, I too will be very eager to go through those comments. I think there's a lot of value in those, as well as the information that was presented. I mean, it's, there was so much, it's kind of hard in one sitting to figure out what the takeaways are. But yeah, I mean, from what I gleaned from the statistics from the survey, it looked like investing in infrastructure and affordable housing and, putting resources towards the unhoused were the top three in the household and the business survey. The business survey also had assistance to small businesses mixed in there too. But, just at a very high level, that's what I took out of it. And I look forward to reading those comments. Thanks.
Are we getting the comments Wednesday? Is that what you said?
No, they'll be here. We'll be able to get them to you before we probably
Later
are done
today?
today. Mhm.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, everybody just take some time to digest it and figure out what the priorities are or aren't for you and what you heard in the survey here today, and we will get this back on the agenda and come back at it now that we have this information with us. I believe next up is our agenda review. And so next, tomorrow night, we have the Urban Renewal Agency Community Forum at 6 p.m. here in the council chambers. That is an opportunity for the public to come and learn more about the Urban Renewal Agency and give us feedback on what they would like to see us do with those dollars that are generating from that program. Then Wednesday evening, we have a business meeting. And we have coming up a public hearing for the construction excise tax. Consent calendar has a resolution to approve an assistance to firefighters grant. We need to make an appointment for that open position on the UAPC. And then we have an executive session that will be performance evaluation of public officers. And I had a question for Mark. Did you have an opportunity to look into the question about the construction excise tax?
Well, I've been thinking about it, and I think I need a little more specificity to answer your question.
Okay, well, I've heard that there's a possibility of somebody wanting an amendment to the construction excise tax. So I guess I was wondering just what happens, like, if we went ahead with the second reading and then made an amendment, or what happens if we make an amendment, before going through with the second reading, just how that timeline plays out.
I don't believe that you can amend it at the second reading. The second reading's got to be the same as what was approved the first time around. So I think just my gut reaction is if there's momentum to amend what was tentatively passed in the first reading, I think that the counselor who, assuming there's a counselor who's in favor of that, I think the counselor ought to make a case for that in discussion prior to the second reading. If there's, looks like that's going to carry the day, then I think that the best way to go about it would be at that point for the council to vote to reject the ordinance in the second reading, and you can set it out for a new hearing, but it would have to restart with that amendment in it.
Okay, and if we went ahead and approved the second reading, then does that put a situation where nothing can be changed for a period of time?
I don't think it does, because I don't know what the amendment would be, but I'm presuming it's something of some significance. And if that's the case, then that's just merely modifying something that's at that point already on the books, and I think that could be addressed soon, as in without a waiting period.
Just the following meeting or later that same meeting?
I think that it would be appropriate to wait so that it's at least noticed, and so the public sees what the change would be.
Okay. Go ahead.
I kind of have a follow-up question, which is about the second reading and the ordinance, because as it is in our packet is not how it was written up. In our packet, it has $30,000. It does not have the $50,000, which was what we did at the reading.
That was amended the first time around. So the first reading, what was in the packet, I don't know, you call it an example, a suggestion, it's what you all started from. Mm-hmm. And then as the discussion ran its course, then someone made an amendment. And so that was passed in the first reading as amended, so not identical to what was in the packet. The second reading, in order for the second reading to be valid, it would have to be identical to what was passed at the first reading, which, as you correctly pointed out, is not identical to what was in the packet.
And so my question is, and this is, so I just want to be clear on second reading, because to me, second reading is kind of confusing anyway as we come in, because it's like, it's noticed as a public hearing, but we don't allow people to speak. So it's really not a public hearing. Basically what it is it's basically our opportunity to do either vote it down and start over, or vote it as it is and read it and move forward. So those are really the only options that we have, because nobody will have the opportunity to speak, correct?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, the reason we have two readings, it's, a carryover from some old parliamentary tradition on that. And so it makes it at times a bit clunky. But if you could just change it at the second reading, then it defeats the whole point of having 2 readings on the ordinance, because at that point, you're just really having 1 reading on one ordinance and then 1 reading on another.
So will we have the discussion when we go through the second reading on the dais, so we can discuss it? It's just not a public hearing for somebody else to bring something forward.
Yeah, there's no rule against council having further discussion on it when it comes to a second reading. It doesn't usually happen because a lot of times the second reading is merely a formality, everybody's decided on it, but it seems in this instance that perhaps there's some momentum to change what was tentatively decided on at the first reading.
Okay, so that would take place at the discussion, and I'm just looking for clarification. So, okay, thank you.
Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, so I'm just following up kind of on what Valerie said. The ordinance as written in our packet is not the amended version. It is the original version. So is that how it's supposed to be? Okay, so.
Where can council see the amended version that is actually what was approved?
Or anybody else for that point.
Hang on, Rick.
Well, I was unaware that the packet does not reflect how it was amended at the first reading.
Yeah, it's not.
I believe that the packet should reflect what was approved.
I would agree with that from people reading on the outside who are trying to read it, and what they're reading is not what we're doing our vote on.
Rick.
Also, I have a question. The second reading just has to be a majority vote, but not unanimous. It's only the first reading that has to be unanimous for the first reading to take effect and have the second reading. So am I stating that correctly?
Yeah, so if at the first reading it's unanimous, then you don't need to go on to a second reading. If the first reading has a majority, then you have to go on to a second reading, which again only requires a majority.
Well, we always do the second reading. We just do it immediately if it's unanimous. So we couldn't do it the same night because it wasn't unanimous that night. Okay, so what are we going to do about the packet? Because the council would like to see an amended version before we...
We can add that to it and get that to you tomorrow and republicize the packet tomorrow also.
Rob?
So I guess there's talk about people wanting to change aspects of this potentially. Now, are we going to, okay, I only know what's in my head, so am I going to have a chance to hear before Wednesday night on the dais what someone else is thinking? Because sometimes I'm not great at making a last-second decision on the fly. If someone had things that they wanted me to consider, how would I find out what those things are? When I say people, I mean, I'm not talking about constituents because they're free to call me or whatever. But I'm talking about other counselors who are also free to call me. But if someone had things in mind, how do I find out what those things are?
Well, the meeting is the opportunity for the amendments to be discussed, but somebody...
I'm just saying if someone has something in mind and they wanted me to consider it, I'm just telling them, the other 7, you have a much better chance of catching my ear if I have a day to think about it than at the last second before a vote. So I would encourage whoever to possibly speak now or speak to me later or whatever, but don't expect me to process information at the last moment.
Well, I think this is probably not the time. Just to clarify with Mark, I mean, is it okay for us to talk about the amendment now, or do we need to wait till...
Entirely off limits to talk about it now. I mentioned before, I mean, that the state public meetings law says you need to advertise topics reasonably anticipated to be discussed, but the Attorney General's manual also says that does not foreclose the possibility of discussing other topics. So if council feels the need to discuss it right now, I don't think that we're certainly not in violation of public meetings law if you talk about it right now.
Okay, well, how about if we explain, if somebody wants to explain what they're thinking about and people can ask questions and we just won't get into a general discussion about the amendments, but if you, are you still thinking of doing something, Valerie?
I actually contacted both Amber and Brad about something that I'm just concerned about, and that has to do with the 60 years in terms of funding, because in this, it says that in order for a person to be exempt from paying the construction excise tax, it says in here, it has to be for a 60-year, here, let me read it right here, a residential housing that is guaranteed to be affordable under guidelines established by the United HUD, which is 60% or 80%, for the area which the construction tax is imposed for a period of at least 60 years following the date of construction. I happen to know that the funding sources that come through the state for tax credits only go for 30 years. So if they're subsidizing for 30 years, which is what they do, then they would not qualify because they are not doing a 60-year. So I asked to have some research done as to where that 60-year, because a 60-year actually used to be a long time ago, but they have modified it at the federal state level to where now it's only 30 years. And so I was concerned that that could trip us up as we move forward on the way that it's written.
So I've still been digging into that.
Oh, hang on just a second. If you're looking in your packet, it's exemption D is the part that she has the question about.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Amber.
So I've still been digging into what other communities have been doing, but so far what I'm seeing is that the extended time frame from the general programs is to encourage programs to continue to be affordable after their first round ends. So at the end of your low-income tax credit housing, you can choose to go for another 30 years by rehabbing the property and extending that program. And that's where the extended time frame comes from, is to set this up for multiple generations, as opposed to sometimes we've seen affordable housing projects get built for the one term to get a cheaper version to roll into conventional as soon as they can. So it's to set it up to go for multiple terms of affordable housing.
But that also disincentivizes people because they know that if they build it, that that's just how it is. And a lot of times the incentive has been that you'll do it for 30 years, knowing that at some point you could rehab and do whatever. So that's limiting to the people who are making that investment. And so that's why, my concern is that's huge. And I also was questioning also affordable housing. I had another thing in there. Who monitors, and that was another part of this, is who does the monitoring through these 60 years from now, 30 years from now, I'm going to be dead. So who is the person who modifies and keeps this sort of thing going? How does that work?
Again, I'm still looking into that as well, but I do know that for larger multifamily programs, as long as they're within a program, we can reasonably assume that they are still within those guidelines, because the programs are very strict on whether or not they're qualifying. The monitoring would come in for smaller projects or single-family homes that are saying that they're going to be affordable as well.
So you're saying that when single families or duplexes or triplex come in and say that they're affordable, they're saying that they have to be in there for 60 years. Who is going to monitor those for 60 years?
I'm still looking into that to see what other communities have been doing.
Those are the questions I have, and that's why I think that I don't see how we can do this thing without knowing some of that information.
Vanessa?
Councillor Lovelace, can you restate the 30-year subsidy, where that comes from once more?
The tax credit, which is where the subsidization comes for an example, Cathedral Square, which was the one that was recently approved, this last round of funding through the state, which is where subsidized housing gets a certain percentage of their financing. that those funds are set down for 30 years, and that's how they're set up. And I will tell you, because I know, because my husband, we have had ones for 30 years, and so now, after 30 years, you know, which is basically, you know, after retirement, it's just like you have to look for somebody coming in to buy that up again. So it does limit, because there's only certain places that will do that. Not everybody can come in and buy, you know, go into this sort of project. So it's more limiting than you think. And I think most people don't have an understanding of low-income housing tax structure, don't have an understanding of how these programs work, and they are extremely, they're difficult to build, they're difficult to get financing, and so I'm just afraid that we're going to cut our throats by instigating something that we really don't totally understand at this point.
I understand your concern. My question is, what's the agency that issues that 30-year tax credit?
Low income, I don't know that.
Tax credit is usually overseen by OHCS. It was my understanding that it's actually generally 21 years, similar time frame. My previous job was compliance for all of these programs, so.
Thank you.
That's why I knew you would have an understanding what it was, is because she has worked in that field.
Okay, I think everybody has a pretty good understanding now of what Valerie's questions are. Mark, just to clarify, if council were to go ahead and approve the CET on a second reading, they could then follow up and make necessary amendments if more information was to come through regarding these questions?
Yes.
Or they could vote down the second reading, theoretically amend the language in the ordinance and come back at it a second time if that was the proposed route.
Yes, that's also correct.
Okay, I think everybody should understand what their options are.
I just wanted to make a comment on further clarification with regards to what's in the packet and in relation to council's first reading. The standard procedure that we've used is we don't change the original language in the packet from the first reading to the second reading. That stays the same. What the action taken from city council is in the packet. It's in the minutes of the previous meeting that states what the action is, what the second reading is. We have not historically provided an updated ordinance that reflects those changes on the second reading in the packets. So I just want to let you know, we'll get you that, but that's not what we've done in the past. We kept the original ordinance as it was during the first reading, and then for your second reading, it's the same, but you have knowledge of where council goes in the direction based on the minutes that are in the packet.
Those minutes are on page 32 and 33 of the packet, so just for people's information.
All right, that strikes me as being a little odd, but we can have that discussion another day. How about? Did we work through all the questions regarding construction excise tax? Do you still have something, Brian?
Yeah, it strikes me as odd as well, not having it updated in the packet. It seems like it would have come up by now that this, would have been an issue. But just to answer, I wanted to answer Valerie's point about who monitors this, because I'm pretty sure when we went over to the last meeting, Brad was saying that there's a 4% administration fee that is part of this, and I saw it in here. City can collect up to 4% of the revenue to fund administration of the program. So I think Brad said that 4% administration would be used in part or wholly to do that monitoring you were talking about, if I recall correctly.
Rob?
Yeah, on the update to the ordinance, as we agreed to it last time, it strikes me as really odd also that it's in the packet as the original version, because that's, I guess, what the newspaper picked up, because they also reported on the 30,000. That's what another Josephine County alternative news source has picked up. That's what many of the people who have reached out to me have quoted. So it really, to me, not only is it odd, but it really disservice to the whole community and causes potentially more incendiary language and interaction than is necessary in this particular case. So I definitely think that that needs to be changed from this point forward, if that in fact is the way we've been doing it.
Yeah, we've been doing that like that for a while, and it's not a problem for us to change. We could change that, and based on, I think if the mayor wants to take consensus that we're changing that policy process, we can do that. It doesn't happen that often that we have a first and a second reading, so it's, I think, less than a dozen times a year, something like this comes up throughout the year. So, but we can definitely change that, and in the packet, start having the as amended for the second reading if something doesn't pass in one meeting.
Would you all be in favor of doing that, having the packet reflect the actual change from the first? Yes. Okay, yeah, I would think so. I mean, I think in this case, and it probably, like you said, doesn't happen in a lot of cases, but there may be people who wouldn't have approved the first ordinance if it hadn't been amended, and so to vote on it with different language the second time is strange. Rick?
So Aaron, as you stated, the publication would indicate the new document is an amended document, which would then recognize the motion that was made, because I think that's important, and that's basically what I can see the process here. We have the original document, and the motion is an amendment to that document, but now we're going to produce that document ahead of time, which will have the title amended document. All right, I think that will help clarify things. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great going forward. And also, yeah, if you could provide, at least by email, to the council a copy of the amended document before Wednesday, that would be great. All right, and then we have, so that gets us through next week, or this week rather. Then next Monday we have a workshop with minimum density with exemptions, discussion on fireworks ban and the city limits. Any questions? Vanessa?
Yeah, I'm going to take it back to this week again. I wanted to ask Aaron, is the forum tomorrow evening going to be live streamed on YouTube?
Yeah, we normally don't live stream the forums, but we can see if it could be in the schedule for them to do. We have not in the past done live streaming of forums.
Okay. Also on the Agenda Center, I don't know if it was an intention to post it as a forum, but it's not listed under the Urban Renewal Agency for the Grants Pass website, just a heads up.
We also have the roundtable scheduled for that for tomorrow at 1 o'clock with regards to the urban campground, which will be taken care of, and that will include, just as council directed, some of the stakeholders at the table to discuss contract language and some of the critical success factors in order for an urban campground to have happen. And then after that discussion, we'll open it up to public comment for those people that are present that would like to provide comments, and then we'll put that in a report to council.
Okay.
I have a question.
Hang on just a second. Were you saying that if you click the UAPC on the Agenda Center, that the forum doesn't come up? Or not? I'm sorry, not UAPC, URA?
Yeah, that's right. If you scroll down alphabetical order under Urban Renewal Agency, the most recent one is from 2017.
I'm not following what problem needs to be solved.
Similar to under the different categories, there's a category for, I believe, community forums. And for example, like Aaron had mentioned, it is listed that the urban campground, it is noticed and listed, the agenda, the time, the meeting place, and the basis of the discussion, but the Urban Renewal Agency forum is not listed in the same sense.
Okay, so that's a calendar scheduling issue on the website?
Yeah, just a heads up for that. I don't know if it was ever intended for it to be posted or not.
Yeah, it's on the calendar, and it's on the URA page, but we can certainly add it to that one, Councilor.
Thank you.
It's on 2 different locations right now, but it's not on that third location that she just mentioned. So
Yeah,
we can add
probably
it.
missed checking a box somewhere to get it under that filter. Okay, I wanted to note that emergency shelter HB 2006 application is not listed on December 16th. So that was something we had discussed at the agenda setting when we moved it off today's agenda.
Yeah, that just didn't get, I think, on there, but that is scheduled for the December 15th meeting for council action.
Okay. Valerie, did you have something?
I did. I just had a question on the Urban Renewal Agency Community Forum. Was there actually any mailing sent out to anybody in the Urban Renewal Agency about this forum so that they knew it was happening, so they could give some input?
We sent an email to all of the downtown list. Our business advocate, she maintains an email list of all those. I will have to verify for the Broad. We don't have an email list for all Urban Renewal Agency addresses at this point in time. I will let you know tomorrow what the exact mailing was. She's been out, but I will follow up on the actual mailing.
Okay, I just was curious. The Spalding is also in the Urban Renewal Agency,
Yes.
is it not? So I was just wondering if some of those people out there had the option of knowing it was happening. So anyway, I would like to see as many people as possible, as I guess is what I'm trying to say. So the more we can get out there, the better.
Do you know what sort of advertising in general we did on that?
We did notice the through the chamber, through the downtown business association email list, as well as those that have expressed an interest in the past through the community development department. You know, if they have just voluntarily asked to be added to a list related to urban renewal matters. I'm missing one. I apologize that Susan Seabrider handled that, and she's not here today.
Okay. Do we generally do any sort of widespread, like paid advertising for public forums?
I'm not familiar with widely spread paid advertising we do, whether it be print, radio, or television, where we're paying for advertising. We normally are pushing through social media and through press releases. And then, like Brad mentioned, if we have specific email listings, if it's a targeted group, or we'll use community partners like the chamber or other partners that have some kind of relationship or nexus to the topic that we're talking about, we'll utilize some of their services also.
Okay.
And tomorrow nights did go through the Facebook and Twitter feeds that the city has. Tomorrow night's forum.
Okay. All right. Any other agenda questions?
I had one.
Joel?
The Caveman Pool, I know we have, we were waiting till the park superintendent came on board, and I know that we advertised that job, and then the applicant withdrew their name after coming to Grants Pass. I don't know when it would be timely to put that back on for funding and for...
It's on January 3rd.
It's
Pool
on January
funding.
3rd? Did I miss that? I
Yep,
missed
pool
that.
funding options. It doesn't say caveman if you were scanning, but it says pool funding options.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
Great job.
Brian?
Yeah, I didn't, I have a couple things for agenda, but I just first wanted to say I didn't see the Urban Renewal Agency Forum on the Facebook posts anywhere. Maybe I'm missing it, but I didn't see it in there. I did have a question about, well, I have two questions. The first one is, I know that there is, the federal lawsuit that we have. I know that the opening arguments are happening very soon, in a couple weeks or so. And I was wondering if there's any opportunity for the public or for counselors or for anyone to listen in on that, if there's any sort of live stream or if there's a Zoom meeting or if there's any way for people to listen.
I'll find out and I will email the whole council about it.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I had is with regards to our executive session Wednesday night. Are we going to be getting a copy of all of the comments from the other counselors? So we will have them all together. Will each counselor have a copy of those? Is that how that works? Do we get those ahead of time or do we just get them right on the spot?
I think it's on the spot, actually.
I think it's on the spot. Council President is facilitating that and putting that stuff together. I don't think they're all together yet at the moment, but they'll be working towards getting that done, and that'll be part of the discussion process.
Okay. If there's any possible way to get them ahead of time so we just have a little bit of time to review them, I think it would be helpful. Getting stuff on the dais right before we're supposed to be talking about it is difficult for me. So even if it's earlier that day, that would be helpful. So I don't know if that's something that could be done, but if so, it would be great. Thank you.
All right, any other, Valerie?
Yes, I think this is apropos. I asked a while back to get the recommendations from the PAVE committee, surplus property recommendations. And we've heard from a constituent about Allenwood property being a possible property to bring forward as an affordable housing site. It is about, I don't know, a little over 9 acres. And I don't know about how we go about bringing that forward, but I think it would be a good thing to bring forward because it is a piece of property the city does own. So I'm not sure exactly how that goes, but I'm asking that we consider bringing that forward.
Yeah, I think ultimately that would be the councilor determination. If enough council members feel as though it's appropriate to have as a workshop discussion item, then we could definitely put that on a workshop and have that general discussion, and from there get direction on what you'd like to do or take a look at the possibilities for that property.
Okay, so I guess I'm asking the other councilors whether they're interested in bringing it back forward. I think October 5th was when we actually decided to take no action, but as I said, it is a city-owned property. It is ripe for possible discussion on affordable housing, and I would like to see it brought to a workshop to discuss.
Did you say that's the Allenwood property?
Yeah, that's the Allenwood property, and it was put out in a November 18th memo to all of us.
All right, council, are you interested in having a workshop to discuss that property for affordable housing? I'm seeing enough nods anyway. Okay, thanks, Valerie. Anything else? All right. In that case, we will move on from agenda review, and we have an executive session, but it looks like Susan has something to hand out, so go ahead and do that, Susan, while I'm finding my reading material.
Mayor, one of the things before you read for executive session, I didn't know if council wanted to take an opportunity. I was hoping that maybe Susan can just explain what the A through E addendums are, and then if you have any questions about the addendums before we conclude regular session, that might be helpful for council, but that's up to you, Mayor.
That would be great.
Here's a picture of the survey.
You can just use that podium right there, Susan, if you want.
There.
So what you have now, make sure the red light's on. What you have now in your packet is Exhibit A, which is a copy of the letter that went out, translated front and back. You have a copy of the postcard that went out. You have Exhibit C, which is a copy of the household survey. Exhibit D is a copy of the business survey, which is exactly the same, except for the last 2 questions. Both of those were translated into Spanish, but I just provided the English versions. And then Exhibit E, which is the compilation of the comments from each of the others, and then the final compilation of the general comments for the household and the business. So it starts out with the comments for the household and then goes to the comments for the business for each section.
Okay, thank you. All right. With that, the council will now meet in executive session. Oh, I guess I need a motion to adjourn into executive session, huh? Valerie?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting
Into executive session.
and move into executive session.
Thank you, otherwise we were done. Joel? All right, all in favor of moving into executive session?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of discussing